One of the things that I've noticed, and actually one of my favorite things about comics, is how culture shifts over the years. And I wanted to point out a specific topic that I noticed, at least relating to psychology, morality, child development, that I've noticed specifically in Super Friends and the modern Justice League comics as well. So, a little bit of a walk down memory lane. I picked up recently a few of the old Super Friends comics. There's a comic shop in Tempe that actually has a really good selection of some of the older ones, and I had been reading through a few of them. And you had this trend. You guys are familiar with like Wendy Marvin and the Wonder Dog? Do we remember these ones?
Totally
these guys?
Totally dated.
So, what's that?
Superdog?
No, this was before. This was pre.
Right
No, the Superdog was different.
This is just Wonder Dog.
Yeah, that's just Wonder Dog. Wonder Dog? Yeah, Wonder Dog. You can't define Wonder Dog. He's his own dog.
Crypto was Superboy's.
Yeah.
Basically, Crypto was a success, and they
That's
tried to
Superman.
have successes with other animals.
Yeah, Wonder Dog didn't have any powers.
Dog.
It was basically, a lot of it reminds me of Scooby-Doo infringement. I think that's what was going on at the time. Basically, the Wendy and Marvin and the Wonder Dog, they were kind of being trained to join the Super Friends or something like that, and there was this reoccurring theme. Maybe they're kind of being taught right from wrong and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, that kind of pops up a lot.
They were non-paid interns.
What's that? They were the interns of the...
They're the non-paid interns.
And in hindsight, yeah, they'd be in these really dangerous situations with people who had superpowers, and then there were just these minors walking around. I don't know. Anyway, well, there was this one issue that this is actually issue number 1 of the Super Friends comics. A few things I noticed, interesting storylines with the comics, but also they were different. They went in different directions than the actual show did. So if you're a comic reader and you haven't read the old Super Friends comics, they're worth picking up. They're actually, my own personal view, the storylines are a little bit better than the Super Friends show. You guys ever watched the Super Friends show? Who's seen the Super Friends show as an adult? Okay.
Okay, who won't own up to it?
Now, to be honest, who's seen the Super Friends show as an adult and thought, wow, I'm really sober?
I'm a nerd.
Sometimes it gets a little hard to watch. The storylines back in the day were a little bit kind of tricky. Well, in this issue, they had some of the villains. This was the first issue of the Super Friends. They had some of the villains, and they were training their own kids to kind of be their own kind of prodigies. So you had any of the, you had like basically Poison Ivy had her own apprentice, Cheetah, Penguin. Some of the characters that you already kind of know, they had their own apprentice. And basically, whereas Wendy Marvin and then the dog were taught to be, you know, superheroes up and coming, well, these guys were taught to be, I guess, supervillains up and coming. This is Wendy and Marvin. They're hauling. Wonder Woman's putting them in charge of taking care of prisoners for some reason. That doesn't seem like a great idea to me. This is the dog. I probably should have zoomed in on that backside. I don't know. The more that you look at that dog's rear end, you can't unsee it. I looked at that for a good 2 minutes. And then you can see all the villains. Everybody there had their own kind of accomplice, that kind of thing. Well, in the storyline, at some point, these kids kind of, the villains in training, they realize that they don't want to have a life of crime. Censorship was really different in the books than it was in the comics, because Penguin's totally going to kill these kids. The idea was basically they trapped Wendy and Marvin, lifted them up on these balloons. Toyman's going to shoot these birds, toy birds, at the balloon and then pop them, and then they're going to fall and die.
That's kind of a complicated, you know, Rube Goldberg kind of way to kill him.
Yeah, but the story's like 19 pages. How do you fill...
Clearly you haven't seen the Penguin and Adam West thing.
Yes.
We got to talk about something. You got to get something accomplished. Well, anyways, the kids kind of wake up, and then in the end, the villains in training, they kind of rebel, and then they do the right thing, and you know, and then we never want to do crime again, and we learned our lesson and stuff. There were some other interesting moments in this issue. This robot for some reason was gonna kill Superman. He was, I don't know, by squeezing him and giving him a super hug, I guess. Robin gets kicked in the face by Poison Ivy. I thought that was worth mentioning. In the comics, they got away with a lot more than what they got away with in the show. The comics were, they had a little bit more leeway than the show did. Now, one of the things that, if you're not familiar with that show, sometimes it was kind of awkward a little bit, and I want to show you a short little example of what I mean by this. I just found a little montage clip on YouTube, and at least we can kind of get on the same page with this clip. Basically, they had a lot of mistakes, they had a lot of things going on in the Super Friends show that if you watch it as an adult, you think, wait, why is this actually happening? There's some subtitles on this that kind of point out the little questionable parts of it.
Legion of Doom.
Banded together from remote galaxies are 13
Oh my God.
sinister villains of all time.
That's not right there. Someone else.
3, 13, 4. Watch out for. Who's I can't go free.
It's not.
He's coming from the same area of the swamp. I'll go to the swamp and check it out. Right away, by midnight. I want you all to converge on the swamp in full force. He's coming from the same area of the swamp. I'll go to the swamp.
Someone else. Someone else. It's the witch.
There's never been a threat the Legion of Doom couldn't handle. It's the intruders. My coloring will stop them.
No. No, it doesn't.
Nice work, Greenland.
No.
One way to stop the living dead. Lure them back into the depths of the swamp and tie them to dead trees with dead vines.
It's actually a really good idea, actually. Well, I think one of the reasons that they had some questionable moments on that Super Friends TV show, it might have something to do with they had a lot of censorship back in the day with kids' cartoons. How many of us are kind of familiar with this? I don't know if you guys have seen like the corruption of the youth type documentaries. Like the He-Man show, for instance, was criticized by a lot of Christian groups who were convinced that it was turning their children into Satan worshipers. These types of things. You guys are familiar with it? Go on YouTube.
And in the comics, they go into ethics too. How
Yeah.
the FCC tried to crack down on them.
Yeah, so back in the 50s, you had congressional panels, and so real similar to what you saw with rap music in the 80s and 90s when you had, Well, anyways, I'm not going to get into that in detail, but we could talk about that if you like in the discussion section. The censorship in the cartoon really stands out if you read the comics. So this is another
Scarecrow.
issue where Scarecrow was the main villain. This is issue 32 from 1980. Oh, that issue number 1, I don't know if I mentioned that. I had it in the presentation. That was from 1976.
Wonder Twins.
So, yeah, now we don't have Wendy and Marvin anymore.
They're
We
boring.
have we've got the Wonder Twins, you know. Well, so anyways, in this story, Scarecrow douses everyone with fear gas. Do you guys remember Batman Begins?
Yep.
So if you're not familiar with the same kind of idea. One of the things that I love about comics is, some people complain about this, but you see culture getting passed down from one generation to the next, and I think that's kind of neat, even if you're just getting sprayed with fear gas, I guess. So anyways, the whole Justice League was tripping out on fear gas. Scarecrow throws a camera at Wonder Woman's face. She's freaked out by metal, so she takes her bracelets off and whatever. This gets kind of dark. Scarecrow makes Aquaman afraid of water, and then now he's convinced he's gonna die because he can't get to the water. So it's a little intense. Dude, sorry. Try Gatorade. Superman punches Batman in the face because he's afraid of the dark. You guys got to read some of the old ones. They're actually some of them are actually really good. Anyway, in the next panel, he's fine. He gets hit by Superman in the next panel. He's like, everyone starts to kind of overcome their fears. This one you wouldn't have seen on the cartoon. Scarecrow is straight up drowning Robin. Face under water. Kid, you're not getting up. Batman sees this. Even though it's dark outside, he has to overcome his fear to, knock Scarecrow out in the back of the head. And he actually kind of throws him off of a building. Actually, Wonder Woman throws him off of a building. She overcomes her fear because she's on Amazon. And then Superman was afraid of flying, but he overcame his fear to rescue Scarecrow, which he should have overcome the fear like just 3 minutes later. But oh well, it's okay, it's fine. What's done is done. That kind of thing. There's a common trend in a lot of cartoons, kids' books, different forms of parenting advice that you have to teach the kid right from wrong. And actually, I'm going a little bit too fast. You guys know this, you read kids' books, and kind of the underlying theme is this is right and this is kind of wrong and stuff. And a lot of modern psychology has kind of questioned this idea. Do we constantly need to be teaching children right from wrong, or could we maybe be teaching them something more productive?
Both.
Maybe. Let me walk you through a little bit of research on this. In modern psychology, there's more of an understanding that a lot of morality, not all of it, but a lot of morality is not top-down that you need to be taught. It's more bottom-up that the kid already kind of understands. Morality is complicated, but if you understand it at least in this right or wrong context, if you understand it at least in the context of pro-social and anti-social behavior, then there's a lot of research out there that kind of points out that a lot of children already kind of get these concepts. Like they already kind of understand some of these concepts. There's strong evidence that young children and even babies are born with pro-social behaviors already. Basically, if you take young babies and show them behavior that looks pro-social and anti-social, then they will be most kids, you're talking 80 to 90% of babies. So if you have a baby lying around, you could try the experiment. 80 to 90% of the babies are more attracted to the pro-social behavior, the characters that are helpful, the characters that are more positive. They're already attracted to them. And then also cooperation. A lot of young children will spontaneously cooperate, even though they're not being rewarded, even though they're not really getting anything out of it, except for just the cooperation and I guess the subtle benefits of it.
But the Max Planck team also tested children and apes for their social skills.
So, und hier, und hier. Oh. Und hier. Fertig.
Let's see, I put this one up here, and then I'll just put this one on. Oh. The help the kids gave was entirely spontaneous. Thank you. Dankeschön. Okay, all done.
Superman's colors.
The surprise was that chimps also volunteer when an object is out of reach.
So this suggests that potential altruistic motivation to act on behalf of others is something that is shared among chimpanzees and humans, and therefore something that maybe was already a characteristic of our common ancestor.
But if the impulse to help has deep evolutionary roots, in humans, it's blossomed.
Habe ich da alles reingetan? Guck mal. Kann ich auch hier? Oh. Ui. Die sind aber schwer, ne? Guck. Oh. So, und drehen.
While helping in chimps was limited to reaching tasks, human children are eager to help with all sorts of troubles. Now, what what's more, they seem to enjoy it.
So another version of those experiments, babies as young as 6 months, 9 months, you show them a little puppet show basically, and in one version of the show you have a helpful character and a character that's hurtful, basically a character that's being antisocial, and then at the end of the puppet show you show them both of the puppets. You give them basically both of the puppets, and 80 to 90% of them will gravitate towards the more helpful one, towards the more pro-social one, which is basically, I don't know, that's, to me, that's kind of what superheroes are all about. They're just kind of like the pro-social components of them, except for maybe Deadpool.
Deadpool's an idiot.
One of the things, though, okay. One of the things, though, that I want to point out is that instead of, with child development, instead of always worrying about teaching kids right from wrong, that's still important, but you might get farther if you focused more on teaching kids self-control. If you focused more on teaching kids patience. If you focused more on teaching, taking other people's perspectives. If you focused more on teaching emotion regulation. If you guys ever see a child throwing a tantrum, at the end of the day, what is a tantrum if not your emotion regulation is off the charts? You can't regulate your own emotions. So maybe you'd be better off working on some of those things rather than only focusing on just the right or wrong type of things. So we'll have further presentations and discussion on any of this stuff, but one of the things that I wanted to point out on this note of discussion, because we are going to do the discussion panel next, in more recent Justice League stories, many aspects of morality are discussed in more complex ways, and they're framed in ways that we can think critically about. So basically, morality, right from wrong, that kind of thing, in specific situations in more modern Justice League stories they're shaped as things that can be discussed. A really good example of this in more recent Justice League stories is, who here's read the Identity Crisis series? I tried to pick do we like it? Do we not like it? Just like it? Yeah, most people, I don't know, I've found that the people who've read this story could be kind of polarizing. These are a couple of covers from the series. Identity Crisis brought up a lot of moral issues, and throughout the whole story, the characters were debating them. And I'll just mention one thing, I'm not going to spoil the plot, but you had this character, Dr. Light, who was really out of control, and he was, pulling all sorts of shenanigans, to say the least. And you had Zatanna in the lower left-hand corner. She's a magician, if you're not familiar with her. One of her things is she could do, they had this in the Matrix. I'm thinking of Men in Black, where you forget. They didn't do that. Men in Black. Huh? Yeah, that thing where you flash. It's Men in Black. I could use one of those. But where it basically is Zatanna
Erase your
would do
memory.
this. What's that?
Erase your memory.
Yeah, erase your memory.
Like Xavier does.
So she started to do this memory erasing procedure without other people in the Justice League being in on it. Certain members were in on it and certain members disagreed, you shouldn't be doing this. But basically one of the things that she did, because Dr. Light was so crazy, she basically not only erased his memories, she rewrote his personality a little bit. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dr. Light from the Teen Titans type stories. Anyone? He's kind of like a goofball type character. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Well, this is his origin of how he got to be that goofball. Well, she basically kind of, with magic, lobotomized him a little bit. Well, anyways, in the story, Batman walks in on her doing this. He's like, what the heck are you guys doing? Because it's Batman. And he freaks out, and so now she has to erase his memories.
You've seen her doing this, basically?
Yeah, so it's,
And the moral here is a web of lies keeps getting bigger and bigger.
that's basically it, right? If you're just transparent, you get the stuff out in the open.
I come from the storytelling perspective. So.
Well, anyways, that's all I'll say, but the point with, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring up that Identity Crisis is throughout the entire story. That story's from, if I remember right, 2005. You can buy graphic novels of it downstairs when that opens up. I think it opens up at 4. So if you want to get comics, these are some good ones to start with if you're not sure where to start. The reason I want to end my portion on the Identity Crisis is it brings it up to a discussion. You have some of these complex issues, let's talk about it. And then don't forget about the I'm just gonna leave that.